Welcome to our deep dive. We are really so glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
If you're tuning in right now, chances are you're looking to build a deep, practical understanding of how professionals actually evaluate the technology we all rely on every single day.
Right. And we know your time is valuable.
Exactly. So you are here for a customized, really intensive exploration of the source material. We're sort of putting on our instructor hats today.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, it's a highly focused, step-by-step mission into the actual mechanics of digital trust.
That's right. Because today's mission is centered on a very specific, incredibly crucial part of the ISAC IT audit framework.
The ITF.
Yes, specifically, we're looking at the 5th edition. And for those who might not live and breathe this terminology every day.
Which is most people.
Right, exactly. ISAC is essentially the global professional association for IT governance, security, and audit professionals.
They set the rules of the road.
They absolutely do. And the specific rule we are zeroing in on today is the standard known as due professional care.
Due professional care.
Okay. Along with its corresponding practical guidelines. I mean, this framework is universally recognized. It really is the gold standard for how IT audit and assurance practitioners must conduct themselves, from the exact moment they take on a job to the moment they officially close the file.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate, because I can hear people wondering right now, why should you, the listener, care about a standard called due professional care?
It does sound a bit dry, doesn't it?
It sounds super dry, like something buried in page 400 of a corporate compliance manual.
Yeah, but it's not.
No, it's not. Whether you are preparing for a governance role or managing complex IT projects, or maybe you're just fiercely curious about how we actually build trust in a world overflowing with artificial intelligence and data breaches and cloud computing.
Which is everywhere now.
Everywhere. Understanding this concept of due care is your ultimate shortcut. It is basically the secret decoder ring for knowing how top-tier professionals separate the actual truth of a system's security from all the slick tech jargon a vendor might throw at you.
It's the absolute foundation. I mean, without a framework of due care, an audit is just a person staring at a screen making educated guesses.
Or uneducated guesses.
Exactly. Worse, uneducated guesses. The IT audit framework, the ITHF, establishes the mandatory requirements that give an audit its actual, tangible credibility.
Right.
When a company puts out a statement saying our systems are secure and audited, this standard is the moral and professional compass that determines if that statement actually means anything at all.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of General Standard 1005.
Let's do it.
What does the text actually mandate?
It dictates that practitioners have to act with integrity, diligence, and sound judgment, and that all has to be completely aligned with ISACA's strict code of professional ethics.
So we know the baseline. Auditors have to be ethical, and they have to be diligent. But how does that actually translate to the day-to-day grind?
Well, the framework places a massive, massive emphasis on confidentiality. Statement 1005.1 is very clear. It says auditors must maintain high standards of conduct and character. They have to refrain from discreditable acts.
Which seems obvious, but you have to write it down.
You do, and they have to fiercely protect the privacy of the information they obtain. They cannot use it for personal benefit, and they cannot disclose it unless required by legal authority.
Think about the unique position an IT auditor is in.
It's incredibly unique.
They are walking into an enterprise, maybe as an internal employee, sometimes as an external consultant, and they are literally asking to see the most vulnerable, sensitive, highly classified inner workings of that company's digital infrastructure.
They are actively looking at the flaws.
Right. They are hunting for the weaknesses. And without an ironclad, non-negotiable guarantee of confidentiality and ethical behavior, auditees would never, ever share the sensitive data required to actually fix those vulnerabilities.
The entire system of independent assurance would just completely collapse.
It really would. That makes total sense in theory, but let's make it tangible for you listening. Picture the scenario. You're an IT auditor brought in to review the access controls on a company's human resources and payroll database.
A very common audit.
Very common.
Yeah.
Your job is to make sure that when someone is fired, their access is revoked immediately so they can't log in and sabotage the system.
Right, you're testing the termination controls.
Exactly. But to test that, you have to look at the live database. Suddenly, you are staring at the exact salaries, the bonus structures, the personal financial details of every single person in that company.
Which is a lot of power.
It's a ton of power. You might see the CEO's compensation, or worse, you might see that a peer of yours, someone sitting in the next cubicle, is making 20% more than you are.
And that is exactly where the standard of due professional care kicks in hard. Under this mandate, that auditor cannot turn around and use that payroll data to march into their boss's office and negotiate their own salary.
Right.
They cannot go to the water cooler and gossip about who is on the chopping block based on the HR statuses they just saw. That information is locked away in a professional vault in their mind.
It's like a doctor's Hippocratic oath, or attorney-client privilege.
That is a perfect analogy. You are evaluating the controls around the data, the mechanisms that protect it. You are not harvesting the data for personal advantage.
Wait, let me push back on that for a second.
I'm for it.
If I'm an auditor and I'm digging through these files and I stumble across outright undeniable corporate fraud,
Okay.
let's say I see the executives are embezzling millions of dollars. Keeping that confidential feels like I'm protecting the bad guys. How does the standard justify staying silent in a situation like that?
That is the classic ethical dilemma of the entire profession. And it's exactly why the framework includes a specific carve-out in 1005.1.
The legal authority exception.
Exactly. The standard mandates confidentiality unless disclosure is required by legal authority. It doesn't mean you protect criminals, but it does dictate how you handle the finding.
You don't take it to Twitter.
No, you definitely do not take it to social media, and you don't call a journalist. Due professional care means you escalate it through the proper, lawful channels.
So what does that look like?
First, you take it to the highest level of internal governance. That usually means the board of directors or the audit committee.
But what if the board is in on it?
If the board is complicit, or if the law in your specific jurisdiction legally obligates you as a professional to report certain types of financial crimes, then you report it to the appropriate regulatory body or law enforcement.
Okay.
It's about following a strict, legally sound protocol rather than acting as a vigilante.
Ah, okay. So it's about discipline. You have to follow the evidence, document everything meticulously, and adhere strictly to the established communication protocols.
Sure.
That actually brings up an interesting pivot. We're talking about all these heavy, intense responsibilities. What kind of mindset do you need when the pressure is on?
You need a very specific mindset.
Right. Because the framework transitions here from the mandatory rules in the 1000 series into the 2000 series. The general guidelines. This is how you actually apply the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things it talks about in Guideline 2005.1 is competence and reasonable care.
It defines what due care looks like in practice.
Yeah, and there's a line in the source text that I found genuinely surprising. It says, due care does not demand infallibility or extraordinary performance.
I love that line. It's one of the most important clauses in the entire framework.
Really? Why?
Because it sets a realistic, enforceable benchmark. Think about it. If the standard for an audit was absolute perfection, if the auditor had to guarantee with 100% certainty that a system could never, ever be hacked, no one could ever sign an audit report.
Because the liability would be infinite.
Exactly. The liability would be catastrophic. Systems are too complex, and threat actors are way too sophisticated.
It's such a relief to read that. It basically acknowledges that auditors are human beings.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't expected to be perfect clairvoyants who can magically see every single hidden piece of malicious code buried in millions of lines of software.
They are not, but if they aren't expected to be perfect, we have to ask, what are they expected to be?
Right. What's the trade-off?
The trade-off is they're expected to be consistently diligent, highly skilled, and completely unbiased. Guidelines 2005.2.1 and .2 demand that practitioners approach their work with what they call professional skepticism.
Professional skepticism.
Yes. They have to maintain objectivity and independence, both in their actual mindset and in how they appear to others. They need to act with a questioning mind.
Let's unpack that term, because professional skepticism sounds like a fancy way of saying you have to be paranoid and assume everyone is lying to you. Is that what it actually means in practice?
Not exactly paranoid, but definitely not blindly trusting. It's the classic trust the verify approach.
Okay.
You don't walk into an engagement assuming management is intentionally deceiving you, but you absolutely do not just take their word for it without independent evidence.
Give me an example.
If a system administrator tells you, yes, we review the firewall logs every single Friday, professional skepticism means you say, great, please show me the system-generated timestamps and the sign-offs for the last 10 Fridays.
You don't just write firewall logs reviewed on your clipboard.
Never. You need the proof. And here's where it gets really interesting. Guideline 2005.2.3 says auditors have to remain on high alert for specific red flags.
Like what?
Things like inefficiencies, errors, conflicts of interest, incompetence, or scope limitations.
Oh, scope limitations. Let's talk about that. Let's say you're meeting with an IT director. They're super friendly. They buy you coffee. They hand over a massive stack of pristine reports for the primary data center.
Sounds like a great meeting so far.
Right. And then they casually say, you really don't need to look at that legacy backup server down in the basement. It's air-gapped. We're decommissioning it next month anyway. It's totally fine. Let's just focus on the cloud migration.
If you are applying professional skepticism, that is the exact moment the alarm bells in your head should be deafening.
Why? They said it was fine.
Because a manager trying to steer you away from a specific asset, no matter how casually or politely they do it, is a textbook scope limitation. Due professional care means that legacy backup server is exactly the server you now need to look at first. You cannot let the auditee dictate the boundaries of the audit just to avoid discomfort or to save time.
Right. You can't just say, well, they seem nice and I don't want to cause friction, so I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah.
You have to push through that social friction.
You have to.
But here's the thing. To push back effectively, you actually have to know what you're looking at. Guidelines 2005.2.4 and .5 explicitly state that practitioners must stay informed of developments in professional standards and comply with statutory and regulatory requirements.
Precisely. Competence is not static. It decays over time if you don't maintain it.
That makes sense.
If you were an absolute rock star IT auditor 10 years ago, let's say an expert in physical on-premise servers and tape backups.
The old school stuff.
Right. You cannot exercise due professional care auditing a modern serverless cloud environment today unless you have continuously updated your skills.
Because you literally wouldn't know what you're looking at.
Exactly. If you don't understand how a technology works, you don't know what the risks are, which means you don't know what questions to ask. And if you don't know what questions to ask, your skepticism is totally useless. You'll just be nodding along to whatever the IT director tells you.
So we've established the baseline mindset. You're skeptical, you're competent, you're treating the data like it's radioactive in terms of confidentiality. But an audit isn't just a single meeting. It's a massive project.
It is.
How does this concept of due care stretch across an engagement that might take 6 months?
Well, Guideline 2005.3.1 makes it very clear that due professional care applies to the entire audit lifecycle. It's not just a switch you flip when you sit down to write the final report.
What does that lifecycle look like?
The lifecycle generally spans 4 distinct phases. First, there's planning, which involves scoping out the environment and assessing the risks. Then comes executing, where you are actually running your procedures and gathering evidence. Third is reporting, where you analyze that evidence and draw your conclusions. And finally, follow-up.
Follow-up, where you monitor if the client actually took corrective actions.
Exactly.
Let's dig into that planning phase for a second, because the framework mentions evaluating specific factors like resource and competency requirements and something called reliance on others, which I find fascinating.
It's a really critical component of planning.
Because it implies that part of due care is knowing when you are completely out of your depth.
That's exactly what it implies. During the planning phase, you have to look at your team and ask, do we actually have the collective skills to do this specific job?
Right.
Let's say an audit firm is hired by a major healthcare network. And part of the scope involves reviewing a brand new, highly complex cryptographic system they use to secure patient data on mobile devices.
Okay, high stakes.
Very high stakes. If your audit team consists entirely of general IT controls specialists, and no one actually understands advanced cryptography or the specific encryption algorithms being used, due care mandates that you cannot just wing it.
You can't just read a Wikipedia article on encryption the night before and pretend you're an expert.
You absolutely cannot. Doing so would provide the client with a false sense of security, which is incredibly dangerous in healthcare.
So what do you do?
If you lack that specific expertise, due care means formally co-sourcing or bringing in a specialist. You go out, you find a legitimate cryptography expert, you evaluate their competence to make sure they are actually an expert, and then you integrate their findings into your audit.
So admitting your limitations and bringing in the right help is actually a hallmark of professional care.
Yes. Faking it is a violation of the standard.
That makes a lot of sense. And it ties right back to that idea of reasonable assurance, mentioned in 2005.3.2. You have to keep reasonable assurance in mind while serving stakeholder interests lawfully and honestly.
Correct. You're gathering sufficient, appropriate evidence so you can confidently say, based on what we tested, these controls are working. But you aren't saying this system is invincible.
Right. And that diligence has to carry all the way through to the final phase, the
Mhm.
follow-up, which is outlined in 2005.4.3. A lot of people think an audit ends when the bound report is handed over to the board.
A lot of auditors wish it ended there, too.
Huh. True. But the framework dictates that you have to exercise due care in verifying management's corrective actions.
Yes. The follow-up is where the real value of the audit is realized.
So if you find a major flaw, let's go back to our earlier example of terminated employees still having active access to the HR system.
The access controls issue.
Right. You write it up, management agrees it's a huge problem. 2 weeks later, the IT director sends you a quick email saying, all fixed, we deleted the old accounts. You don't just take that email, check the box, and close the file, do you?
Absolutely not, because an email is an assertion. It is not evidence. Due care in the follow-up phase means you go back into the system and verify it yourself.
You pull the receipts.
You pull the current list of active accounts and you cross-reference it with the HR termination list. But even more importantly, you verify that the process itself has been fixed.
Right, because just deleting the accounts is a Band-Aid.
Exactly. Deleting the specific accounts you found is just treating the symptom. Did they update the offboarding protocol so the HR system automatically notifies IT the minute someone is fired? If the underlying risk isn't mitigated, the finding isn't truly resolved.
Managing this entire life cycle, from the initial planning conversations through the evidence gathering to the final verification, requires a ton of interaction.
A massive amount.
It brings us to the human element of auditing, which the framework covers extensively under its communication guidelines in Section 2005.5. And I think this is where the reality of the job really hits home for a lot of people.
Oh, without a doubt.
Auditing isn't just a solitary exercise of staring at lines of code in a dark room. It involves really high-stakes interpersonal communication.
It absolutely does. The framework states that clear communication is a mandate. Roles have to be communicated to the audit team before you even start. And practitioners have to communicate with auditees to ensure cooperation, present findings clearly, and inform appropriate parties of the results.
And you have to remember the psychological dynamic at play here.
It's a very tense dynamic.
Right. You're literally coming into someone's workplace to tell them what they're doing wrong. You're dealing with developers and system admins who work 60 hours a week building these systems. They are proud of their work.
They build it from the ground up.
Yeah. And now you're sitting there pointing out flaws. They are naturally going to be defensive. Due care means managing those relationships professionally. You have to present your findings objectively, based purely on evidence, without being adversarial or arrogant.
But you also can't back down just because a manager gets angry or defensive.
Exactly. It requires a tremendous amount of emotional intelligence. You have to maintain your objectivity and your professional skepticism while still maintaining a functional working relationship.
And a big part of maintaining that relationship relies on the flow of information. Guideline 2005.6 points out that practitioners should have a reasonable expectation that management understands it is obligated to provide appropriate, relevant, and timely information.
So management can't just play hide and seek with the data. They can't drag their feet for 3 months and then blame the auditor for the project being late or for not finding a specific issue because the data was withheld.
Exactly. The auditee has responsibilities too. But the framework also highlights a massive responsibility on the flip side. Once the auditor actually gets that data, the burden of protection shifts dramatically to them.
Oh, this is one of my favorite points in the whole framework.
Guideline 2005.6.3.
Yes, the disposal requirement. Walk us through the life cycle of an auditor's laptop, because this is a profound, almost terrifying irony.
It really is. Think about what happens during a major enterprise audit. The auditor requests the most sensitive data the company possesses.
Everything.
Everything. They get network architecture diagrams, lists of unpatched system vulnerabilities, administrative passwords, firewall rules, and millions of rows of financial transaction logs.
The keys to the kingdom.
Yes. And the auditor downloads all of this highly classified information onto their own laptop to analyze it and write their work papers. Overnight, that single laptop becomes one of the highest risk, most valuable assets in the entire company's ecosystem.
It's a goldmine for a hacker. It is literally a roadmap to every single weakness the company has.
Precisely. So if the auditor finishes the report, presents the findings to the board, gets a pat on the back, and then just tosses that laptop in their trunk.
Or worse, leaves it on a table at a coffee shop while they go to the counter to order a latte.
And it gets stolen.
Wow.
Then the auditor themselves has just caused the massive security breach they were hired to prevent. It is the ultimate failure of due professional care.
That is wild to think about.
That's why the framework is so incredibly strict about disposal. Once the engagement requirements and legal retention periods are met, you have to securely wipe, shred, and destroy that audited data. You cannot just leave it sitting in a downloads folder on your desktop for 3 years.
It's a brilliant point. The auditor has to be as secure, if not more secure, than the systems they're evaluating.
They have to practice what they preach.
Okay, so we've covered the traditional rules of engagement. We've talked about ethics, skepticism, the audit lifecycle, and the intense communication and data management requirements.
The core foundation.
Right. But it is time to shift gears, because we don't live in the traditional world anymore. It is 2026. The technology landscape is moving at breakneck speed, and the framework has had to adapt. This brings us to Section 5 of our syllabus today, the modern frontier of auditing. Guideline 2005.7.
This is where the framework really proves its durability. It starts in 2005.7.1 by summarizing the core traits a practitioner needs to preserve credibility, integrity, skepticism, tech proficiency, value delivery.
All the stuff we just talked about.
Right. But then it immediately dives into the deep end of modern, complex environments. And one of the first things it addresses in 2005.7.2 is the use of tech-enabled tools by the auditors themselves.
We're talking about auditors using data analytics platforms, automated scripts, and even their own artificial intelligence to conduct the audit.
Yes. The days of an auditor manually looking at a paper printout of 50 transactions to represent a whole year are completely over.
My goodness.
Now, they dump 5 million transactions into a tool to look for anomalies across the entire dataset. But the framework puts a serious guardrail on this. It says that when using these tools, auditors must ensure the tools actually enhance professional judgment, not replace it.
That is the critical distinction. An algorithm is not a substitute for human professional judgment.
It cannot be. If you plug a massive data set into an AI auditing tool and it spits out a report flagging 10,000 transactions as high risk, due care means you can't just copy-paste that output into your final report.
Because what if the tool's wrong?
Exactly. What if the data was formatted incorrectly when it was imported and the tool is just generating 10,000 false positives?
You'd look like a fool presenting that to the board.
You would. The framework dictates that the audit team must actually be proficient in understanding how the tool works and interpreting the results. You can't just treat it as a magic black box. You have to validate the outputs.
And you have to secure the data processed by the tool.
Right, absolutely. If you upload a client's entire financial history to some third-party cloud-based analytics platform you found online, you better have done your due diligence on the security of that platform first.
So we have modern tools, but we also have modern development methodologies. Guidelines 2005.7.3 and .4 specifically address agile environments and continuous auditing.
This represents a massive shift in how IT works.
It really does. In the old days, software development followed a waterfall model. It took 2 years to build a system, and the auditors came in at the very end to review the finished product.
A nice, clean, slow process?
But in an agile environment, development happens in short, iterative cycles, usually 2-week sprints. Developers are constantly writing code, testing it, and pushing it live into production.
And that speed creates a massive, massive challenge for auditors. How do you audit something that changes every 14 days?
How do you?
The framework states that even with these shortened rapid-fire cycles, due care still requires sufficient evidence, clear scope changes, and quality reviews per sprint.
You can't skip the documentation just because you're moving fast.
Right. But the most crucial element it highlights is preserving independence.
This is the part I want to dig into. Because if you are an IT auditor assigned to an agile team, you are likely sitting in their daily stand-up meetings. You're talking to the developers every single morning.
You're embedded.
You're totally embedded. So they might say to you, hey, we're building this new payment feature. How should we design the security control so it passes your audit next week?
And if you tell them exactly how to build it,
haven't you just crossed a line?
You have absolutely crossed the line. If you design the control and then a week later you test the control and say it works perfectly, you've just audited your own work.
Which destroys your objectivity.
It is a massive threat to independence. Due care in an agile environment means establishing strict psychological and professional boundaries. You can advise on the objectives of the control. You can say the control needs to ensure the payment data is encrypted in transit and at rest.
But you can't write the code for them.
You cannot write the encryption code, and you cannot dictate the specific software package they use to do it. You have to maintain that distance, even when you are fully embedded in the team's rapid workflow.
It's a tightrope walk. You want to be helpful and prevent them from building something insecure, but you can't become part of the development team.
It's very tricky.
And speaking of complex relationships, the framework moves on in 2005.7.5 to address third-party engagements.
The cloud.
The cloud. Today, almost no enterprise runs entirely on its own physical infrastructure. Everyone relies on external providers. They use massive cloud hosts like AWS or Azure. They use payment processors like Stripe. They use countless software as a service platforms.
The modern enterprise is a deeply interconnected web of vendors. And this creates a jurisdictional nightmare for an auditor.
A jurisdictional nightmare. I love that phrasing.
Think about it. If a company's entire customer database is hosted in a massive, hyperscale cloud data center, the internal auditor can't evaluate the physical security of those servers.
Right. If I'm auditing a mid-sized e-commerce company, I can't just drive to the major cloud provider's fortified data center in the middle of the desert, knock on the reinforced steel door, and demand to see the servers.
The security guards would literally laugh you out of the building.
And frankly, they should, because letting me in would be a security breach for all their other thousands of customers.
Exactly. So how do you exercise due care when you can't physically touch or see the servers you are supposed to be auditing?
What does this framework say?
It states that auditors must evaluate vendor-provided assurance. In the industry, this is most commonly done through a System and Organization Controls Report, a SOC report.
SOC report.
The cloud provider hires their own independent auditors to thoroughly test their infrastructure. Those auditors produce a SOC report that says, yes, this data center is physically secure, the hypervisors are patched, the networks are properly segregated.
Okay, so the e-commerce company gets the SOC report from their cloud vendor, hands it to me, the auditor, and says, see, the cloud is secure, we're good. Do I just put a check mark on my clipboard and move on?
If you do, you have profoundly failed in your duty of professional care.
Why? I have the report.
Because a SOC report is not a blanket guarantee of security. It comes with conditions. The framework specifically mandates that you must review what are called complementary user entity controls, CUECs.
CUECs. Break that down for us. What exactly is a CUEC in plain English?
Think of the cloud provider like a massive, highly secure bank vault.
Okay.
The SOC report is the bank's guarantee that the vault has foot-thick steel walls, state-of-the-art motion alarms, and armed guards at the door.
Sounds secure.
It is. But the CUEC, the Complementary User Entity Control, is the rule that says the bank's security only works if you actually remember to lock your own personal safety deposit box once you're inside.
So the cloud provider is saying, our infrastructure is incredibly secure, but it's a shared responsibility model. We provide the tools, but you, the customer, have to configure them properly.
Exactly. The SOC report might explicitly state, our system is secure, provided that the user entity enforces multi-factor authentication for all administrative accounts.
I see.
As the auditor evaluating the e-commerce company, due care means you must read that CUEC in this SOC report, and then go check if your client actually turned on multi-factor authentication. If you just rely on the vendor's SOC report without verifying your own client's responsibilities, you've missed a massive vulnerability.
That is a brilliant example. It perfectly illustrates how due care has to extend across the entire digital supply chain. You have to follow the threads of responsibility wherever they lead.
You really do.
But as complex as cloud environments are, they pale in comparison to the final frontier the framework addresses. This is the topic that is dominating literally every industry right now. Guideline 2005.7.6 covers AI-specific audits.
This is the big one.
It addresses the unique, almost unprecedented risks of auditing artificial intelligence and machine learning systems.
And let me tell you, auditing AI is fundamentally different from traditional IT auditing. It completely upends the paradigm we've relied on for decades.
How so?
Traditional software is deterministic. It follows rules. If A happens and B is true, do C. You can look at the code, you can map the logic, and you can test it definitively.
It's predictable.
Yes. But modern AI, particularly generative AI and deep learning neural networks, is probabilistic. It doesn't follow rigid rules. It recognizes massive patterns and makes statistical predictions. It, for lack of a better word, thinks unpredictably.
This is where things get wild. The framework says practitioners must evaluate ethical considerations, foundation models, bias in the training data, the hallucination of outputs, and opacity, the black box issue.
All massive challenges.
How do you even begin to audit a system that hallucinates? If an AI is designed to draft legal contracts, and once every 1,000 times it just invents a completely fictitious law, how do you build a control for that?
That is the defining challenge of our era for auditors. You can't just test the output anymore. You have to test the entire ecosystem around the AI. Due care means you have to rely on specialized ISACA AI audit guidance to structure your approach.
What does that look like?
You have to evaluate the governance of the model. Who decided to deploy it? What is its intended use? Is it aligned with business needs? But even more critically, you have to audit the provenance of the training data.
Because if the data is poisoned, the AI is poisoned.
Exactly. If an AI is trained on historical hiring data to help screen resumes, and that historical data contains decades of implicit human bias against certain demographics,
AI will learn that bias.
it will learn it, and it will automate it at scale. It will become a highly efficient, tireless discrimination machine. Due professional care requires the auditor to look for that bias in the training data, to ask how the data was sanitized, and to demand transparency from management.
Wait, what about the opacity issue? The black box problem?
It's a huge hurdle.
My understanding is that with some of these massive foundation models, the ones with hundreds of billions of parameters, even the engineers who built them can't definitively trace how the model arrived at a specific single output.
That's true in many cases.
If the creators don't understand the inner workings, how can an auditor possibly provide reasonable assurance that it's functioning correctly?
It requires a complete paradigm shift in what we are actually assuring. You aren't necessarily providing assurance on the math happening inside the black box.
Because you can't.
Right. You are providing assurance on the guardrails placed around the black box. You audit the continuous monitoring systems. Are there automated circuit breakers that shut the AI down if it starts producing toxic or wildly inaccurate outputs?
Okay.
Are there human-in-the-loop controls for high-stakes decisions? You cannot assume an AI model is safe or fair just because the vendor says it is. You have to test its boundaries relentlessly.
It is absolutely fascinating. The core mandate from Standard 1005, integrity, diligence, skepticism, remains exactly the same. But the application of it has evolved from checking if a basement server room door is locked to verifying the bias in a neural network.
It's the same ethical core, just applied to vastly more complex technology.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's summarize the syllabus from our session for everyone listening.
Sounds good. The key takeaway from General Standard 1005 and Guidelines 2005 is that due professional care isn't about being an infallible, perfect human being. The framework explicitly forgives the lack of perfection.
Right.
What it demands is a combination of unwavering ethical integrity, relentless professional skepticism, and continuous evolving competence.
And you have to apply those traits across the entire life cycle of an engagement. It starts with having the humility during the planning phase to admit when you need a cryptography expert.
Exactly.
It continues through the execution and reporting phases, managing the intense interpersonal dynamics of telling people their systems are flawed without backing down. It extends to the incredibly rigorous discipline of securing and eventually shredding the sensitive data you collect.
Don't lose that laptop.
Never lose the laptop.
Yeah.
And now it stretches all the way to navigating complex third-party cloud relationships and trying to put guardrails around hallucinating AI models.
It is the bedrock of professional credibility. When these standards are upheld, they create the digital trust that allows our modern economy to actually function. When they are ignored, you get catastrophic data breaches, undetected fraud, and massive systemic failures.
And for you, the listener, whether you are an IT auditor, a project manager, a developer, or just someone trying to understand tech governance, you can apply this framework to your own professional life.
You really can. The principles are universal.
Approaching complex information with a healthy dose of trust but verify skepticism. Having the humility to admit what you don't know and seeking out experts. Fiercely safeguarding the sensitive data you are entrusted with. These are the gold standards for any successful ethical career in the digital age.
They absolutely are. They build a culture of accountability.
Now, before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought. A bit of a brain teaser that builds on those AI guidelines we just explored.
I like a good brain teaser.
We discuss how due professional care requires an auditor to fully comprehend the environment, test the guardrails, and explain the residual risks of the systems they're evaluating. But modern AI foundation models are growing exponentially in complexity.
Faster than we can almost track.
Right, they're becoming darker and denser black boxes that even their own creators cannot fully map or explain. So here's the question. At what point does human due care hit a biological limit?
Oh, that is a profound question. If a system becomes mathematically too complex for a human mind to evaluate, process, and audit within a reasonable time frame, what happens to our framework of trust?
Exactly. Will the future of digital assurance require us to build highly specialized artificial intelligence models specifically designed to audit other artificial intelligence models?
And if we do build AI to audit the AI, how do we, as humans, audit the auditor?
How do we establish due professional care for an algorithm?
That is a wild thought.
It is something to mull over on your commute. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the ISACA framework. We really appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your dedication to learning the mechanics of digital trust. Stay curious, keep verifying, and we will catch you on the next one.